Le coup de projecteur de l'éclaireur, Pascal Clairotte avec vous. Je reçois Lizz Collin pour parler de la vérité sur la mort de George Floyd. Lizz Collin est originaire de Minneapolis, la ville de Prince, située dans l'État du Minnesota. C'est le Midwest des États-Unis. Journaliste d'investigation et de télévision chevronnée, puisqu'elle a très longtemps travaillé pour CBS et qu'elle a été récompensée de plusieurs Emmy Awards. Elle était aux premières loges au moment de la mort de George Floyd et des émeutes qui s'en sont suivies. Elle s'est très vite rendue compte que ce que disaient les autorités locales, les autorités fédérales et les médias était très loin d'être la vérité, toute la vérité, rien que la vérité. Lizz Collin a continué à enquêter plusieurs années durant, ce qui dans un premier temps a donné lieu à la publication d'un livre dont est issu le documentaire de Fall of Minneapolis, la chute de Minneapolis, qui nous intéresse aujourd'hui. Lizz Collin, thank you so much for taking the time to speaking with us. You just produced a pretty jaw-dropping documentary pertaining to the death of George Floyd that shows that what the mainstream media at that time told us or reported was not quite the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Could you first start by reminding us what was the social and political context, both in Minneapolis and in the US, when the death of George Floyd occurred?
Well, no, I appreciate you having me very much, and it's amazing to see how far the documentary has traveled overseas now, as well as millions of people have watched this documentary, and it is available for free. That's what we wanted, as many people to see it as possible. And it seems people are waking up to things that are going on and being manipulated behind the scenes. But at this time, you know, this was May of 2020. We have a presidential election just a few months away in the United States at the time. And there was definitely this feeling of uneasiness as COVID, the pandemic had made its way over, and you know, chaos ensued with that, and also the riots that spread not only all across Minneapolis and in Minnesota, but then all across the country and then the world. But I really thought, as a reporter, I'd been a longtime journalist at a CBS station in Minneapolis and from Minnesota originally. I was just so troubled by all of the information that journalists were privy to that were right in front of them, and they were not passing it on to the public. These lies that they allowed politicians to tell, certain people in power to tell, and they knew better, and there was no pushback. And so that's sort of what led me on this path. First, putting out a book called "They're Lying: The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd," and then taking it a step further with the documentary, which we called "The Fall of Minneapolis," just coming out the middle of November. But you're right, we're still paying the consequences of all of these lies to this day.
So what did you find out? So what were the lies or the discrepancies within the narratives at that time?
Yeah, so it started very early on. And just to mention, I had a unique perspective being married to a longtime Minneapolis police lieutenant who was serving as the union president of the Minneapolis Police Federation at the time. So he'd never seen anything, and he'd been a 30-year police officer at this time, never seen anything like this before. That in the union's role, they're usually allowed to see body camera footage. It's sort of the whole point of officers having body camera footage. The union was locked out of that. The public was locked out of that. This was the first time that body camera footage was not released in such a case as this. Also, the autopsy of George Floyd being done within 12 hours of his death. The public knows nothing, of the actual autopsy results for nearly a week after George Floyd's death. That's also kept from the public, as there are these, now we know, these backdoor meetings with prosecutors as the narrative changes a bit with the Hennepin County medical examiner who conducted George Floyd's autopsy. And also you have these 2 pages of the police training manual that go mysteriously missing the very next day after the incident. We're told by the mayor and the police chief at the time, Madera Arredondo is his name. He's since retired, but they're saying adamantly that this is not a part of police training. Well, then why are these 2 pages of the manual just mysteriously gone? There was a lot happening behind the scenes, also including, I should mention, the FBI being called in within just a few hours.
What were the Fed doing in a case like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people should question. You don't see the mayor of Baltimore call in the federal government, after a murder. These kind of things just don't happen. But the police chief, within just a few hours, made the call to the federal government, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and they had someone on the ground the very next day. And we now know dozens of agents that were involved in this case, which the court records show. Again, something that had never happened before in Minneapolis. And I think that, there are certainly ties to the election, creating this chaos,
What are the actual, or most probable, should I rather say, causes of death of George Floyd?
Well, I think that, Hennepin County, the medical examiner, Dr. Andrew Baker, lays this out very easily within, again, 12 hours. You have 3 times the lethal limit of fentanyl, lethal amount of fentanyl in George Floyd's system, along with methamphetamine. He has a heart that has a severe blockage in it. One artery alone, nearly 80% blockage. He has a pelvic tumor that many have questioned why more testing wasn't done on that. There's some recent court filings related to that situation. We've had many, medical professionals review all of these medical records, and they've kind of described him, sadly, as a ticking time bomb. He just had recently recovered from COVID. So there's a lot happening. But again, the public is only sold this, very racist, divisive narrative, also ignoring the fact that a Black police officer is the one who arrested George Floyd and Alex King. But we're sort of sold these bill of goods, and the evidence just did not match really any of that from the beginning.
Prosecution and the judge were aware of that at the start of the trial of the 3 police officers.
Yeah, so it's four police officers that end up going to prison over all of this. But yeah, you're right. There are many, what many have called very questionable rulings that Judge Peter Cahill made before Derek Chauvin's trial, things that people had never seen before. That includes also this maximal restraint technique that, I talked about the pages that were missing in the manual. The judge rules early on that he's not going to allow that training slide to be shown in Derek Chauvin's trial.
So you're telling me that a judge in a criminal case, which is awfully high profile, prohibited the defense from producing exculpatory evidence?
Yeah, and you have Judge Cahill says that it's because they can't prove that Derek Chauvin took the last training. He didn't sign his name into this document or something along those lines, that MRT wasn't shown that day, and that's what really shocked the entire police department, because MRT again we found training manuals dating back to the early 90s that included this maximal restraint technique. And even talking with Derek, he was well aware of MRT. He'd done the maneuver many times before. Nobody had ever died, obviously. This was a very common technique that officers used for years.
Well, isn't that a miscarriage of justice, to be quite frank? I mean.
Yeah, I think many people are. It's why I named the book "They're Lying," because I kept shouting that at the top of my lungs. I felt like for months on end, and so many people just let them, get away with those lies. But I think Alex King speaks to that in the documentary as well. He is the Black police officer who. He's a Minneapolis kid, grows up wanting to be a police officer, and it's his third day on the job, and he's thrown in prison now, will be a lifelong felon once he gets out in a few years for all of this. But he talks about that. Are we okay with our justice, so-called justice system looking like this? Are we okay with the mob ruling our justice system? We have to decide as citizens if that's where we are.
What's next for these police officers? I mean, are there any appeal plans? Any Supreme Court case or something like that?
The Supreme Court has already come out and said they've denied Derek Chauvin's appeal. They've also recently denied hearing an appeal in Tu Tao's case. He was Derek Chauvin's partner that day and received a nearly 5-year prison sentence. Derek Chauvin has filed a couple appeals here recently. Also, 9 days after we put out the documentary, sadly, Derek Chauvin is stabbed in prison 22 times. And that's a whole nother part of all this, which is just tragic. But there are some more appeals working through the system. They were hopeful the U.S. Supreme Court would take it on, but that doesn't seem to be the case at this point.
So that means that these guys will stay in jail?
Yeah, I mean, Derek Chauvin received a nearly 22-year prison sentence. And then we have Tu Tao nearly 5 years, and Alex King and Tom Lane a few years themselves. So at this point, that is, it has to be corrected legally for anything to change that.
So, and there is no other means of appeal or anything. Basically, they just got one trial and that's it.
Well, Derek Chauvin has filed another appeal based on medical evidence that he was not aware of, and it seems his defense attorney was, and decided not to introduce it in trial. And also some of the findings of the documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis. They're hoping to use that in an appeal going forward as well. Did
things change in Minneapolis since 2020? And if yes, in what direction?
Yeah, well, definitely. I haven't found anybody yet who thinks things are better. I'm still waiting to find that person. But we did call the documentary the Fall of Minneapolis for a reason. There are so many things that are far worse, and that includes crime. I mean, we were a very idyllic Midwestern city in the U.S. In Minneapolis, people felt very safe. Here, and that's certainly not the case. They didn't even keep track of carjackings before all of this. Now there are hundreds a year. They say, I think, a car is stolen every few hours now in Minneapolis. Again, crimes like that never took place. You have businesses, thousands of businesses that have closed their doors since all of this, relocated, or many people, for that matter, have even moved out of Minnesota as a result of all of this to relocate to somewhere. You also have a police department that was nearly 900 police officers were in the Minneapolis Police Department the early part of May 2020, and that number has dwindled to about 500 at this point.
Almost half. So it doesn't seem to be getting better. Would it be safe or wise to say that the situation of Minneapolis can be seen as the epitome or an example of what's going on, especially in non-coastal cities in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that, the match was struck in Minneapolis and certainly spread all across the country. And I think, it's pretty well documented what poor leadership can do. And again, you had a lot of people who sadly remained silent, I think, for far too long. I think some people are starting to wake up to this now. I hope it's not too late. Especially for the next generation and such. But, this really did take our sense of safety away, not just in Minneapolis, but many cities, as they empowered criminals over police officers. So until I think that they kind of right this wrong or frankly tell the truth, I don't necessarily sadly see things changing.
Okay. Now a more general question. I mean, how do you see the presidential campaign unfolding from now on?
Oh, that is $1 million question. I have no. Yeah. That's a hard prediction to make. I do think that as this was, I'll just talk on a personal level. I was never really much of a political person, being a journalist and whatnot. I never thought that, any of that was appropriate. But I really do feel that we're in a kind of a fight against evil at this time. And perhaps it's not Republicans versus Democrats in the U.S. or whatnot. We're really truly fighting, evil. And again, are we okay with our justice system being ruled by the mob, or having a lot of these, questionable involvement from our government and manipulation by the media? All of these things, again, I think people are waking up to that. So my hope is...
Just a second, excuse me, if I may interrupt. When you mean justice system ruled by the mob, you mean the crowd, not the mafia.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, the mob, I guess, I mean, here are the people that were out burning buildings down in the wake of all this, or they're threatening, your life on social media, or like, how did we give these people power? And, in many cases, they're professional protesters. That's what's happening with a lot of these, so-called...
we've seen that with BLM,
Right.